Welcome to the world of science fiction. Don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss new stories. Enjoy the listening. The forest of Zyron 9 stood silent, its alien foliage casting long shadows in the fading light of twin suns. At the heart of this verdant expanse, a solitary cabin nestled among towering trees, its weathered exterior a stark contrast to the vibrant flora surrounding it. This was the domain of Kyle, once the most feared villain in the galaxy, now a self-imposed exile. Kyle's muscular frame moved with practiced ease through the undergrowth, a freshly killed Garca slung over his broad shoulders. The beast's iridescent scales glimmered in the dappled sunlight, a testament to Kyle's hunting prowess. His scarred hands gripped the carcass firmly, calloused fingers betraying years of combat and survival. As he approached his cabin, Kyle's steel-gray eyes scanned the perimeter. Old habits died hard, even in this peaceful refuge. The dagger-shaped earring in his left ear glinted, a reminder of battles long past. Long prayer beads clinked softly against his chest with each step, an incongruous accessory for a man once known as the scourge of the galaxy. Kyle pushed open the door with his foot, his movements fluid and controlled. The cabin's interior was Spartan, reflecting its occupants' minimalist lifestyle. He froze, muscles tensing as his gaze fell upon an unexpected sight. Sprawled on the rough-hewn floor lay an unconscious woman. Her skin was a vibrant shade of green, marking her as distinctly non-human. Her clothing, once elegant, was now torn and stained with a viscous purple fluid. Blood, Kyle surmised. "Damn it," Kyle muttered, his voice a low growl. He stood motionless for a moment, weighing his options. Every instinct honed from years as a galactic outlaw screamed at him to toss the intruder out and disappear. Yet, something gave him pause. With a resigned sigh, Kyle set down his kill and knelt beside the alien woman. Her chest rose and fell with shallow breaths, a nasty gash visible on her side. Kyle's hands, instruments of destruction for so long, moved with surprising gentleness as he examined the wound. "You'd better be worth the trouble," he grumbled, reaching for a med kit hidden beneath a loose floorboard. As he cleaned and dressed the injury, Kyle's mind wandered to the life he'd left behind, the thrill of the chase, the rush of outsmarting entire planetary systems, all sacrificed for this quiet existence. The woman stirred slightly, but didn't wake. Kyle finished his ministrations and stood, stretching his powerful frame. He cast one last glance at his uninvited guest before turning his attention to the Garca. At least one of them would have a decent meal tonight. As dawn broke, painting the sky in hues of lavender and crimson, Kyle sat in silent meditation. The prayer beads slipped through his fingers, each one a reminder of the lives he'd taken, the worlds he'd terrorized. It was a ritual of remembrance and, perhaps, a form of penance. A soft groan interrupted his contemplation. Kyle's eyes snapped open, focusing instantly on the alien woman as she regained consciousness. He remained seated, outwardly calm, but every muscle in his body coiled, ready for action. The woman's eyes fluttered open, revealing irises of swirling gold. She blinked, disoriented, before her gaze settled on Kyle. For a moment they stared at each other in silence. "Where?" she began, her voice hoarse. "My cabin," Kyle replied curtly. "You were injured. I patched you up." The woman attempted to sit up, wincing as the movement pulled at her wound. Kyle made no move to assist her, merely watching with detached interest. "Thank you," she said, her golden eyes studying him intently. "I am Leia. Might I know the name of my savior?" Kyle's lips twitched in a humorless smirk. "Savior? That's a new one. Name's Kyle, and now that you're awake, you need to leave." Leia's brow furrowed, her green skin crinkling in confusion. "Leave? But I've only just—" "Not my problem," Kyle interrupted, rising to his feet in one fluid motion. "I prefer my solitude." Leia managed to stand, albeit unsteadily. "Please, I must repay you for your kindness. It's the least I can do." Kyle's eyebrow arched. "Repay me? And how exactly do you plan to do that?" A mischievous glint appeared in Leia's eyes. "Well, I'm sure a strong, handsome human like yourself might have some ideas." For a moment, Kyle was taken aback. Then, to his surprise, Leia burst into laughter. "Oh, your face!" she exclaimed, holding her side as she chuckled. "Don't tell me you thought I meant reproduction? How quaint!" Kyle's expression hardened. "What's so funny about that?" Leia's laughter subsided, but her amusement remained evident. "It's just so primitive. The idea of coupling for pleasure rather than purely for procreation. It's almost charming in its simplicity." Before Kyle could retort, a sound from outside caught his attention. His posture shifted imperceptibly, senses on high alert. Leia noticed the change, her own demeanor sobering quickly. "They've found me," she whispered, fear creeping into her voice. Kyle moved to the window, his movements careful and deliberate. Outside, a group of heavily armed individuals were approaching the cabin. Their armor bore the insignia of the Galactic Enforcement Agency, a symbol Kyle knew all too well. "Friends of yours?" he asked, his tone deceptively casual. Leia shook her head. "Quite the opposite. They've been hunting me across 3 systems." Kyle turned to face her, his expression unreadable. "Seems my peaceful retirement is coming to an end. You any good in a fight?" Leia blinked, surprised by his calm demeanor. I can hold my own, but against them, we're outnumbered and outgunned." A slow, predatory smile spread across Kyle's face. "Numbers mean nothing. Weapons are a crutch for the weak. Stay close, and you might learn something." Without waiting for a response, Kyle strode to the door. He paused, hand on the handle, and glanced back at Leia. "Oh, and try to keep up. I don't run from fights." With that, he flung the door open and stepped out to face the approaching threat. Leia, momentarily stunned, scrambled to follow. The leader of the armed group, a burly Cronin with cybernetic enhancements, stepped forward. "Stand aside, human. We're here for the girl. This doesn't concern you." Kyle's posture remained relaxed, almost bored. "Funny. I was about to say the same to you. The lady's under my protection now. I suggest you leave." The Cronin's laugh was like gravel in a blender. "Protection? You in what army, meatbag?" "Just me," Kyle replied, cracking his knuckles. "Should be more than enough." The Cronin's amusement turned to rage. "Kill them both!" he roared. What happened next was a blur of motion that Leia could barely comprehend. Kyle moved with inhuman speed and grace, weaving between laser blasts as if they were moving in slow motion. His fists and feet became instruments of destruction, each strike precise and devastatingly effective. Leia watched in awe as Kyle dismantled the armed force with terrifying efficiency. He dodged, rolled, and counterattacked with a fluidity that seemed to defy the laws of physics. At one point, he even closed his eyes, relying solely on his other senses to anticipate and neutralize threats. "Is this too easy for you?" Leia called out, a mix of sarcasm and genuine amazement in her voice. Kyle smirked, his eyes still closed as he incapacitated 2 more attackers. "Just evening the odds a bit. Wouldn't want them to feel too outmatched." The Cronin leader, seeing his forces decimated, charged at Kyle with a roar of fury. Kyle's eyes snapped open, a glint of excitement visible for a brief moment. "Finally, a challenge," he muttered. The Cronin's cybernetic arm whirred as he threw a punch that could shatter concrete. Kyle didn't dodge. Instead, he caught the fist with one hand, the impact sending a shockwave through the clearing. "Impossible!" the Cronin gasped. Kyle's grip tightened, metal groaning under the pressure. You have no idea what's possible." With a savage twist, Kyle tore the cybernetic arm clean off. The Cronin howled in pain and disbelief. Kyle followed up with a series of lightning-fast strikes, targeting weak points in the alien's anatomy with surgical precision. In seconds, the fearsome leader crumpled to the ground, unconscious. Silence fell over the forest clearing. Kyle stood amidst the fallen attackers, his breathing steady, not a hair out of place. He turned to Leia, who stared at him with a mixture of fear and admiration. You're not just some hermit, are you?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Kyle shrugged, nonchalant. "I told you, I don't run from fights." Leia shook her head in disbelief. "But how? I've never seen anyone move like that. Who are you, really?" Kyle's expression darkened for a moment, memories of his past flickering behind his eyes. "Someone who spent a lifetime learning to be the most dangerous being in the galaxy." He paused, looking at the unconscious forms around them. "We should move. More will come." Leia nodded, still processing what she'd witnessed. "Where will we go?" "We?" Kyle raised an eyebrow. "Who said anything about we?" "You can't just leave me," Leia protested. "They'll keep coming, and I need your help." Kyle sighed, running a hand through his short-cropped hair. "Listen, Princess. I left that life behind. I'm not looking to play hero or get wrapped up in whatever mess you're in." Leia's eyes flashed with determination. "I'm not asking for a hero. I'm asking for a partner, someone who can teach me to defend myself, to survive. And in return, I can offer you something you clearly haven't had in a long time." "And what's that?" Kyle asked, skepticism evident in his tone. "A purpose," Leia replied simply. "A reason to use those skills for something other than hunting alien beasts and meditating in the woods." Kyle fell silent, considering her words. The prayer beads at his neck seemed to weigh heavier than usual, a reminder of the life he'd tried to leave behind. "Fine," he said at last. "But we do this my way. No questions about my past, no trying to turn me into some noble savior. I'll teach you to survive, maybe even fight. After that, we go our separate ways. Deal?" Leia nodded, a small smile playing at her lips. "Deal. Though I have to warn you, I'm a quick learner. You might find yourself enjoying my company more than you expect." Kyle snorted, already moving towards the cabin to gather supplies. "Don't count on it, Green. I gave up on enjoyment a long time ago." As they prepared to leave, Leia watched Kyle move about the cabin with efficient purpose. Despite his gruff exterior, she sensed a complexity to this mysterious human that intrigued her. She had a feeling their journey together would be far more interesting and potentially dangerous than either of them anticipated. Kyle, for his part, tried to ignore the unfamiliar sensation stirring in his chest. It had been years since he'd felt the thrill of impending action, the challenge of facing the unknown. As much as he wanted to deny it, a small part of him welcomed this disruption to his self-imposed exile. As the twin suns of Zyron 9 dipped below the horizon, Kyle and Leia set out into the gathering darkness. The galaxy, it seemed, had other plans for the reformed villain and the enigmatic alien fugitive. Their adventure was just beginning, and the stars themselves seemed to hold their breath in anticipation of what was to come. The sleek, stolen spacecraft cut through the inky void of space, its occupants an unlikely pair of fugitives. Kyle sat at the controls, his posture relaxed despite the looming threat of pursuit. Beside him, Leia fidgeted, her green skin shimmering with nervous energy. "Would you stop that?" Kyle growled, not taking his eyes off the starfield ahead. "Your twitching is more annoying than a Gorgolian flea infestation." Leia huffed, crossing her arms. "Well, excuse me for being a bit on edge. Not all of us can be walking statues of calm in the face of galactic manhunts." A ghost of a smirk played on Kyle's lips. Statues don't walk, Green, and this isn't my first rodeo. Right. The mysterious past you won't talk about, Leia rolled her eyes. Care to share any of that wealth of experience? Kyle's jaw tightened. Rule number 1. Don't ask about my past. Rule number 2. See rule number 1. Leia opened her mouth to retort, but a sudden lurch of the ship cut her off. Kyle's hands flew across the controls, his movements precise and unhurried. What was that? Leia gasped, gripping her seat. Tractor beam, Kyle replied, his voice eerily calm. Looks like your friends caught up with us. Leia's eyes widened in panic. What do we do? Kyle's lips curled into a predatory grin. We give them exactly what they want. Before Leia could protest, Kyle cut the engines. The ship shuddered as the tractor beam pulled them towards a massive cruiser looming above. Have you lost your mind? Leia hissed. We're delivering ourselves right into their hands. Kyle unbuckled his harness, stretching languidly. Relax, Green. It's all part of the plan. What plan? Leia demanded, exasperated. Kyle winked at her. The one where we kick their asses and steal their ship. Much nicer than this rust bucket, I'd wager. As their small craft was swallowed by the cruiser's docking bay, Kyle's mind drifted to a memory from long ago. He saw himself as a child, muscles screaming as he held a plank position for hours under his grandfather's stern gaze. Weakness is death, boy, the old general's voice echoed in his mind. The galaxy respects only strength and cunning. Remember that. Kyle shook off the memory as the docking clamps engaged. He turned to Leia, his expression suddenly serious. Stay close and follow my lead, and try not to get shot. I'd hate to have to patch you up again. The ship's door hissed open, revealing a squad of heavily armed troopers. Kyle stepped out, hands raised in mock surrender, a cocky grin on his face. Gentlemen, he drawled, I believe you were looking for us? What followed was a whirlwind of action that left Leia's head spinning. Kyle moved like liquid lightning, disarming and incapacitating troopers with terrifying efficiency. At one point, he even closed his eyes, dodging blaster fire by sound alone. Show off, Leia muttered, ducking behind a crate. Kyle chuckled, taking down 3 more troopers without breaking a sweat. Just keeping things interesting. Care to join the dance, Green? Leia emerged from cover, her own fighting skills pale in comparison but still impressive. Together they cleared the docking bay, leaving a wake of groaning bodies. Not bad, Kyle nodded approvingly. You might survive this yet. Leia rolled her eyes. Your confidence is overwhelming. Now what? Kyle jerked his thumb towards the ship's interior. Now we take the bridge, commandeer this oversized bathtub, and make our daring escape. Try to keep up. As they fought their way through the ship's corridors, Leia couldn't help but marvel at Kyle's abilities. He moved with a grace that seemed almost superhuman, anticipating attacks before they came. How did you learn to fight like this? She asked between skirmishes. Kyle's expression darkened momentarily. Let's just say I had a very motivated teacher. Another memory surfaced. A teenage Kyle, body battered and bruised, facing off against a combat droid, his grandfather's voice cold and unforgiving. Again, until you can beat it blindfolded. They reached the bridge, Kyle dispatching the crew with ease. As he settled into the captain's chair, Leia studied him closely. You know, she said carefully, for someone who claims to have given up violence, you seem awfully comfortable with it. Kyle's hand stilled on the controls. Old habits die hard, Green. Don't mistake necessity for enjoyment. As they plotted their escape route, Leia's curiosity got the better of her. So, if you're such a badass, why hide out in the woods? Why not use your skills for something? I don't know, Noble. Kyle barked out a harsh laugh. Noble? There's no such thing in this galaxy, just varying shades of self-interest masked as righteousness. Leia frowned. That's a rather cynical view. It's a realistic one, Kyle countered, expertly maneuvering the cruiser out of the space dock. I've seen the rot at the core of the so-called noble institutions. Trust me, we're better off on our own. As they jumped to hyperspace, leaving their pursuers far behind, Leia pondered Kyle's words. There was a story there, buried beneath layers of sarcasm and indifference. Over the next few weeks, they hopped from planet to planet, always one step ahead of their hunters. Kyle began training Leia in earnest, pushing her to her limits and beyond. Again, he barked, circling her as she struggled to maintain a difficult stance. Your enemies won't give you a break. Neither will I. Leia gritted her teeth, muscles trembling with exertion. You're enjoying this, aren't you? A ghost of a smile played on Kyle's lips. Maybe a little. It's been a while since I've had a student. Oh? Leia grunted, managing to hold the pose for a few more seconds before collapsing. And who was your last student? Kyle's expression clouded over. No one important. Water break. Then we work on your reflexes. As days turned to weeks, Leia found herself slowly chipping away at Kyle's hardened exterior. She caught glimpses of a different man, one capable of dry humor, even the occasional act of kindness. One night, as they camped on a desolate moon, Leia finally broached the subject that had been gnawing at her. Kyle, she said softly, why did you really help me that day in the forest? Kyle stared into the flickering campfire, silent for a long moment. Because, he finally said, his voice low, for a second, you reminded me of someone I used to be, someone who still believed they could outrun their past. Leia leaned closer, sensing a rare moment of vulnerability. And did you? Outrun it, I mean? Kyle's laugh was bitter. You never outrun your past, Green. You just learn to live with the weight of it. As he spoke, another memory surfaced. Kyle, now a young man standing before his grandfather in full military regalia. You'll be the finest admiral the galaxy has ever seen, the old man declared, pride evident in his voice. And if I don't want to be an admiral? Kyle had asked, already knowing the answer. His grandfather's eyes had hardened. Then you'll be nothing. Is that what you want, boy? To throw away everything I've given you? The memory faded, leaving Kyle with a familiar ache in his chest. He looked at Leia, seeing the question in her eyes. Let's just say, he said carefully, that sometimes the path others choose for you isn't the one you're meant to walk. Leia nodded, understanding dawning in her eyes. Is that why you became what exactly? A criminal? Kyle's smile was sharp. The galaxy's most wanted at one point, but that's a story for another time. Get some sleep, Green. Tomorrow's training is going to make today look like a vacation. I suppose you deserve to know why they're after me, Leia said, her golden eyes meeting Kyle's. Kyle nodded. I've been wondering. It's not every day I find myself on the run with a green-skinned fugitive. Leia took a deep breath. I used to work for the Galactic Council as a data analyst. One day I stumbled upon files that implicated several high-ranking officials in a massive corruption scheme. They were siphoning funds meant for planetary aid and using them to finance illegal weapons development. Kyle's expression remained neutral, but his eyes sharpened with interest. I couldn't just ignore it, Leia continued. So I copied the files and planned to expose everything, but they caught wind of it. Now they're hunting me to silence me and recover the data. And let me guess, you've got the files hidden somewhere they can't find? Kyle asked. Leia tapped her temple with a wry smile. Up here. My species has eidetic memory. I memorized everything before destroying the physical evidence. Kyle nodded slowly, pieces falling into place. That explains the relentless pursuit. Any names I might recognize in those files? Leia hesitated for a moment. There was one name that stood out, a high-ranking general known for his brutal efficiency and unorthodox training methods. They called him the Galactic Hammer, Kyle finished, his voice suddenly cold. At Leia's surprised look, he added, "My grandfather." Leia's eyes widened. "Your grandfather? I had no idea." Kyle's laugh was bitter. "Small galaxy, isn't it? Looks like we both have reasons to want to bring down the corrupt brass." As the weeks wore on, their pursuers grew more numerous and more desperate. Kyle found himself falling back into old patterns, the thrill of the chase awakening something he'd long tried to bury. During one particularly harrowing escape, Kyle single-handedly took on an entire squad of elite troopers. He fought with a ferocity that both awed and terrified Leia. "You're bleeding," she pointed out as they fled the scene. Kyle glanced at the gash on his arm, shrugging. "Flesh wound. Hardly feel it." Leia shook her head in disbelief. "You know, most people would be a little more concerned about bodily harm." Kyle's grin was feral. "I'm not most people, Green. Pain's an old friend of mine." As they continued their journey, Leia began to see the complexity behind Kyle's actions. His violence was tempered by an unexpected gentleness, his cynicism by flashes of deep-seated pain. One night, after a particularly close call, Leia found Kyle meditating, his prayer beads moving slowly through his fingers. "What are those for?" she asked softly. Kyle's eyes remained closed. Reminders of lives taken, worlds changed, mistakes made. Leia sat beside him, her voice gentle. "Sounds like a heavy burden to carry." Kyle's eyes opened, meeting hers. "Better to carry it than forget it. The moment you forget the weight of your actions is the moment you become truly dangerous." In that instant, Leia saw beyond the hardened exterior to the man beneath, a man grappling with his violent nature, seeking redemption in his own way. As their bond deepened, Kyle found himself facing an internal struggle. The pull of his old life, the intoxicating rush of danger and power, warred with his desire for peace. After one particularly brutal fight, Kyle stood amidst the fallen bodies, his breathing heavy, eyes wild with adrenaline. Leia approached cautiously. "Kyle," she said softly, "it's over. We can go." Kyle turned to her, and for a moment, Leia saw something dark and primal in his gaze. Then, like a switch being flipped, it was gone. Kyle's shoulders sagged, the fire in his eyes dimming. "Yeah," he muttered. "Let's get out of here." As they boarded their latest stolen ship, Leia placed a hand on Kyle's arm. "You okay?" Kyle was quiet for a long moment. "Sometimes," he finally said, "I wonder if I'm any different from the man I used to be. If all this," he gestured vaguely, "is just delaying the inevitable." Leia's grip tightened. "You are different. The man you used to be wouldn't have helped me, wouldn't have cared." Kyle's laugh was hollow. "Maybe, or maybe I'm just fooling myself, playing at redemption." As they took off, leaving another world and another batch of defeated enemies behind, Kyle couldn't shake the feeling that he was balancing on a knife's edge. One side offered the peace he'd sought for so long. The other promised the return of the man he'd once been, the most feared being in the galaxy. And part of him, a part he tried desperately to ignore, longed for that return. Kyle and Leia found themselves facing their greatest challenge yet. A trap had been sprung, leaving them cornered on a desolate asteroid with enemies closing in from all sides. Kyle stood at the edge of a cliff, watching the approaching ships with an odd sense of calm. Leia joined him, her expression a mix of fear and determination. "So," she said, trying for levity, "got any more miraculous escapes up your sleeve?" Kyle turned to her, a strange light in his eyes. "Just one. but it's going to require me to be something I swore I'd never be again." Leia met his gaze steadily. "Whatever it takes, I'm with you." As the enemy ships landed and troops began to pour out, Kyle closed his eyes, reaching deep within himself. When he opened them again, Leia saw a transformation. Gone was the reluctant mentor, the man seeking peace. In his place stood the galaxy's most dangerous being, ready to unleash hell. Kyle's voice was low, almost a growl. "Stay close, Green, and whatever you see, remember that this isn't who I want to be. It's who I have to be." With that, he stepped forward to meet the oncoming horde, the fate of both fugitives hanging in the balance. The asteroid's barren landscape erupted into chaos as Kyle unleashed his full potential. He moved like a force of nature, each strike precise and devastating. Leia watched in awe as her companion became a blur of motion, taking down swaths of enemies with terrifying efficiency. "Is this what you were hiding all this time?" Leia shouted over the din of battle, her own moves a pale imitation of Kyle's deadly dance. Kyle didn't respond, his focus absolute. His eyes, usually steel gray, now blazed with an inner fire. He fought with a controlled fury that left no room for error or mercy. As the fight raged on, Leia found herself backing away from a particularly large alien wielding a plasma axe. She stumbled, certain her end had come, when suddenly Kyle was there. He caught the axe with his bare hands, the plasma sizzling against his skin. "Didn't I tell you to stay close, Green?" Kyle growled, his voice tight with exertion. With a twist of his wrists, he disarmed the alien and sent him flying. Leia stared at Kyle's hands, expecting to see severe burns, but his skin was unmarked. "How?" she began, but Kyle cut her off. "Later," he said, his eyes scanning the battlefield. "We're not done yet." Hours passed, the relentless assault wearing down even Kyle's superhuman stamina. As the last enemy fell, Kyle stood amidst the carnage, his breathing heavy but controlled. Leia approached him cautiously. "Kyle, are you still you?" Kyle turned to her, and for a moment, Leia saw something ancient and terrible in his eyes. Then he blinked, and it was gone, replaced by exhaustion and a hint of shame. "Yeah," he murmured, "I'm still me, for better or worse." As they made their escape in a commandeered ship, Leia tended to Kyle's few injuries. Her touch was gentle, a stark contrast to the violence they'd just survived. "So," she said, breaking the heavy silence, "I guess we need to talk about what happened back there." Kyle winced, though whether from pain or the prospect of the conversation, Leia couldn't tell. "Not much to say. You saw what I really am, what I've been running from." Leia's hand stilled on his arm. "What I saw was someone protecting me, protecting us. Yes, it was intense, but you're not a monster, Kyle." Kyle's laugh was bitter. "No? Tell that to the hundreds I've killed, to the worlds I've terrorized." "The past is the past," Leia insisted. "What matters is who you choose to be now." Their eyes met, and something electric passed between them. Before either could speak, the ship's alarms blared. "Looks like we're not out of the woods yet," Kyle muttered, moving to the controls. As they evaded their pursuers, weaving through an asteroid field with death-defying maneuvers, Leia found herself admiring Kyle's unwavering focus. Even now, facing overwhelming odds, he remained calm and collected. "You know," she said, a hint of amusement in her voice, "for someone who claims to have given up the life of a galactic menace, you're awfully good at this." Kyle's lips twitched in a half-smile. "Some skills you never forget, Green, like riding a bike if that bike was a high-speed chase through a minefield." Their banter was cut short as a massive cruiser appeared, blocking their path. Kyle's eyes narrowed. "That's the flagship," he said, his voice low. "The big boss must be on board." Leia tensed. "What do we do?" Kyle's grin was feral. "We end this, once and for all." What followed was a daring infiltration that pushed both Kyle and Leia to their limits. They fought their way through the cruiser's defenses, Kyle's impossible skills complemented by Leia's growing prowess. As they neared the bridge, Kyle paused. "Listen, Green, whatever happens in there, thank you for believing in me when I couldn't believe in myself." Leia's heart raced, and not just from the adrenaline. She reached out, cupping Kyle's face in her hands. "Always," she whispered and kissed him. The kiss was brief but intense, a promise of things to come. When they parted, Kyle's eyes held a new light. "Well," he said, his voice husky, "that's certainly motivation to survive this." They burst onto the bridge, catching the enemy leadership off guard. At the center stood a figure Kyle recognized all too well, his grandfather, the man who had molded him into a weapon. "Hello, boy," the old general sneered. "Come to make your family proud at last?" Kyle's voice was ice. "No, I've come to end this. All of it." What followed was a battle of not just physical prowess, but of wills. Kyle fought with everything he had, each move a rejection of the path his grandfather had laid out for him. Leia provided crucial support, her presence a constant reminder of why Kyle was fighting. In the end, it came down to Kyle and his grandfather, locked in combat that seemed to defy the laws of physics. "You could have had everything," the old man roared. "Power, respect, the galaxy at your feet." Kyle's response was calm, even as he dodged a vicious attack. "I found something better, something real." With a final, decisive move, Kyle disarmed his grandfather. The old man fell to his knees, defeat written in every line of his body. "Finish it," he growled. "Prove you're the weapon I created." Kyle stood over him, fist raised. For a moment, the outcome hung in the balance. Then, slowly, he lowered his hand. "No," Kyle said softly. "I'm not what you made me. Not anymore." With the threat neutralized and evidence of the corrupt operation secured, Kyle and Leia found themselves suddenly free. As they stood on the observation deck watching the stars streak by, Leia turned to Kyle. "So," she said, a hint of nervousness in her voice. "What now?" Kyle was quiet for a long moment. "I've spent so long running," he finally said, "from my past, from myself. Maybe it's time to stop running." Leia's heart leapt. "What are you saying?" Kyle turned to her, vulnerability clear in his eyes. "I'm saying, maybe we could find a quiet corner of the galaxy. Together. If you want." Leia's response was to pull him into a passionate kiss. Years passed, and Kyle and Leia made a home on a peaceful planet far from the galactic core. Their love deepened, tempered by shared experiences and mutual understanding. To Kyle's ongoing amusement and occasional exasperation, Leia never quite lost her fascination with human reproduction. "You know," she said one night, tracing patterns on Kyle's chest, "I still can't believe your species does this for fun." Kyle chuckled, pulling her closer. "Trust me, Green. The fun's just getting started." Their family grew, eventually numbering 6 children, each a unique blend of their parents' strengths. Kyle, drawing from his own upbringing but tempering it with love, trained them rigorously. On a scorching afternoon, Kyle stood watching his children run through a particularly challenging obstacle course. His oldest son, determination etched on his face, was helping his younger sister navigate a tricky section. Leia approached, wrapping her arms around Kyle from behind. "Don't you think you're being a bit hard on them?" she asked, concern in her voice. Kyle sighed, leaning back into her embrace. "The galaxy's a dangerous place, love. They need to be prepared." "For what?" Leia pressed. "The war's over. We're at peace." Kyle turned to face her, his expression serious. "Peace is never guaranteed. I want them to be ready for anything. But, he added, seeing the worry in her eyes, I also want them to know love, to have the childhood I never did. As if on cue, their youngest daughter came running up, her green skin flushed with exertion. Daddy, watch me do the high jump. Kyle's face softened, a smile spreading across his features. All right, sweetheart, show me what you've got. As he watched his daughter fearlessly tackle the obstacle, Kyle felt a warmth in his chest that had nothing to do with the blazing suns overhead. This, he realized, was what he'd been searching for all along. Not power, not notoriety, but this. A family, a purpose, a love that anchored him. Later that evening, as the family gathered for dinner, Kyle looked around the table at the faces of his children and his wife, each one a miracle, a testament to the life he'd chosen. You know, he said, his voice gruff with emotion, I never thought I'd have this, any of this. Leia squeezed his hand. Are you happy, my love? Kyle's answer was immediate and heartfelt, more than I ever thought possible. As night fell and the children were tucked into bed, Kyle and Leia stood on the porch of their home, looking up at the stars. The same stars that had once represented danger and pursuit now seemed to twinkle with promise. Do you ever miss it? Leia asked softly. The excitement? The danger? Kyle considered the question. Sometimes, he admitted. But then I look at you, at our children, and I realize I've found something far more thrilling, far more challenging. Leia raised an eyebrow. Oh? And what's that? Kyle pulled her close, his voice a low rumble. Living. Truly living, not just surviving. Loving, even when it's terrifying. Being a father, a husband. It's the greatest adventure of all. Leia's laugh was warm against his chest. Who would have thought? The galaxy's most dangerous man brought to his knees by love. Kyle grinned, a mischievous glint in his eye. Oh, I wouldn't say I'm entirely tamed, Green. Care for a demonstration? Their laughter echoed into the night, a joyous sound that spoke of hard-won happiness and a future bright with possibility. As they made their way back inside, hand in hand, Kyle paused for one last look at the star-filled sky. He thought of the man he'd once been, of the long and winding path that had led him here. For the first time in years, he felt truly at peace. The galaxy's most feared villain had indeed found redemption, not in grand gestures or epic battles, but in the quiet moments of a life filled with love, purpose, and the enduring challenge of family. Kyle smiled to himself. It was, he decided, the perfect happy ending to his story.